Hello and welcome to the launch of AJ Small Projects 2021. I'm Emily Booth, editor of the Architects Journal, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our special panel discussion, which will focus on what makes for a winning small project. We have got two brilliant speakers today who will be sharing their hints and tips for outstanding small schemes. Martin Edwards of Martin Edwards Architects, who is the winner of Small Projects 2020, and Nimi Athanayaka, who is co-founder of trailblazing practice NimTim Architects. AJ Small Projects is our annual search for the best UK completed small project on a tight budget. And once more, we are thrilled to be running AJ Small Projects in association with our sponsor, Marley. I would like to thank Marley for their ongoing and important support. They have sponsored this wonderful prize for more than a decade now, and without their input, this event couldn't take place. So our many thanks to them. Entries are now open for AJ Small Projects, so do please visit the AJ website for more information and make sure you enter by Friday, the 15th of January. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Rob Wilson, architecture editor at the AJ, who can tell you more about the prize and who will be chairing the panel discussion. Thank you, Rob.
Hello, thank you, Emily. As Emily said, I'm Rob Wilson, architecture editor at the AJ, and it's great to be launching AJ Small Projects again. Every year, it's a fantastic opportunity to publish and recognise schemes on more modest budgets. We've actually tweaked the limit up this year, so it's up to a contract value of 299,000 and under, which just reflects inflation and ensures we're still including a wide range of smaller schemes. Over the years, winners have included tea houses, market stalls, domestic extensions, theatre spaces, conservatories, and cabins. But what exactly are the qualities that make for a winning small project? To discuss this question and bring their insight as designers, I'm really pleased to be joined by Martin Edwards of Martin Edwards Architects, whose house in North Wales is the AJ Small Projects Award winner this year, and Nimi Athanayaka, one of the founders of NimTim Architects, whose work exhibits a distinctive and highly tailored approach to reworking living space. Welcome to you both. And to help cue the discussion, I've asked both Martin and Nimi to briefly talk about some recent projects and their approaches and thoughts on designing schemes on a smaller scale. So firstly, I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to speak about his award-winning house in North Wales. Martin.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Rob. Thank you, Emily. I'll jump straight in and present the house in North Wales. And really, it's just a little bit about the process through the design and build of the project. Okay. So the house sits amongst low-lying farmland in an area of outstanding natural beauty and with panoramic and ever-changing views towards Snowdonia. One of the house's owners is reliant on a wheelchair, and the house had become progressively more inaccessible to her. So our brief was to rethink the ground floor of the house and really to allow the family's continued use. This is the plan of the house before we started work. After almost 50 years of family ownership, the house had a very particular character that we were keen to avoid disrupting. It was also important to everyone that the remodeling should not feel like it had been designed around accessibility. So I was invited to stay at the house at the beginning of the design process. And this was, it was an invaluable opportunity really, first to measure the house, but also to spend some time in the wider setting. And it's a very beautiful setting, as you can see in the photos. But there was also a sort of local vernacular to pick up on, and in particular, the small sheds that dotted the immediate landscape. And they have an economy of form and detail, sometimes quite improvised. And the early design process was informed by this, and sort of collecting, distilling, and editing of examples. So alongside this, we developed layouts of the new rooms in close collaboration with the client, her family and care team. And although we made some significant changes, we also tried to keep as much as possible and to reuse fittings where we could. And this was partly about maintaining the feel of the house, but to an extent it also helped control the budgets that we could spend on a few things that made an appreciable difference. So the external walls of the existing single-story outbuilding were retained and remodeled. And these sit below a new roof to form a kitchen and dining area. And then the bedroom and bathroom are formed as a new addition. I mean, this is a sort of more developed sketch, but really this is the final form that the project took. So the new addition was positioned on the site of a former byre that had collapsed into undergrowth many years ago at the end of the sort of outbuilding. This photo was taken in the 1980s. So the new volume offsets the original footprint, and it defines a small protected outdoor space. But equally important was that it avoided changing the familiar view from the entrance of the house when approaching along the farm track. The farm track is off to the sort of bottom right of this image. And a small sort of shed-like form duplicates the profile of the stone building, but in a lighter and more economical way. And it's deliberately low-key to sit comfortably in the landscape and linked to the existing house, but at the same time, maintaining its own independent character. And then two large windows open the external spaces to the distant mountain views. And again, I mean, the house hadn't really previously related to the landscape in that way. So it's something else that we tried to address. So the rooms, yeah, they're interconnected, but they offset to avoid revealing everything at once. So the overall plan form remains sort of very compact, and it's no more than was needed. These are just a few early site photos and showing the retained stone walls of the existing outbuilding. And this became the dining room and the kitchen. Most local building firms are small in the area and focused on traditional skills that were required to maintain the rural building stock. So the most economical way to build was to use these and to work with these construction methods using standard materials that were readily available and familiar. So the new addition is timber framed, and it's clad in a lightweight sheeting made from recycled wood fiber. And this also had the benefit of being lightweight as a construction material. So it could be easily transported along the unmade track that was the only means of access. The timber frame also enabled high levels of thermal insulation and lower overall energy use. But I think importantly, it's simple, sort of straightforward carpentry. That's just a view of the sort of composition of the existing and new form. So we tried to keep all of the details as simple and as economical as possible. So for example, the window and door openings are taken up to eaves level, the timber wall plate doubles as lintels, and the roof sheeting is brought to a flush verge. So it's an economical detail, but it also respects the prevailing rural typology. But in a few sort of specific places and components, they were less standard. So this is the metal framed dining room window, and it matches an existing window on the earlier house. And things like ironmongery as well, light fittings. So principally those parts that you interact with directly and where the use would make a specific contribution to the whole. We prepared full construction details. So it was quite a detailed package given to the contractor specifications. And where necessary, we prepared samples and mock-ups in the studio to describe what was needed. And also things like, I mean, we took on patinating all of the ironmongery for the project, partly because we couldn't procure it at reasonable cost as a package, but I think partly because we enjoy being involved and being a little bit hands-on, and it's one of the nice things about smaller projects, I guess. Regular site visits were made. The studio is based in London, but we could get there and back in a day. It was a long day, but it meant that we could work with the site team. And in one or two instances, it meant we could adapt details to available trades and to the local supply chain. So the truss in the dining room was made by a local metal worker, more sort of typically making agricultural components. And a local joinery shop made the majority of the joinery. So these are just a few photos of the completed project, just to sort of round up. I think one thing was it about this project, and often I think we find with smaller projects, is it's important to be flexible at times. And I think also obviously to fight the right battles. The lead verge detail of the extension is perhaps a case in point. It was originally designed to be an off-site fabricated, a painted metal profile, but we had a very good lead worker on site, and the contractor was more comfortable with that as an approach. So we agreed to change the detail. And I think, I mean, in the end, I think we all came to like it. And the other thing is that it helped with other negotiations. The patio in the foreground of these photos they're sort of slate slabs. That, again, it's a sort of local detail, as is the slate fence that surrounds the project, something that we've tried to reappropriate. So the new spaces are robust, flexible, and the remodeling also seeks to minimize energy use and ongoing costs. But it's mostly very low tech. We've insulated it as highly as we can where there's opportunity, but there's a control system for the heating, but really it's all generally very simple and straightforward. It's just a view through to the kitchen and onto the bedroom. And it was a particularly stimulating project. And coming back to the earlier point about collaboration, I mean, the architect-client collaboration for this project, what was key, as was being able to spend some time in the house and the landscape and sort of get to know the setting. But I think the most interesting solutions often come from quite specific client briefs, and also from constraints such as budget. And it sort of helps focus on what's essential. So in this small project, and I think in much of what we do, we try to focus on what was already there, be that the wider setting or a specific space. And this helped inform carefully directed interventions. But I think perhaps importantly for us, it was about also adding no more than was absolutely necessary. This is just a final sort of view towards the mountain range. So thanks very much. I'll hand you back to Rob.
Hi, thanks very much, Martin. Sorry, I couldn't quite turn on my camera there, but that was great. That was a really thoughtful presentation. A lot of food for thought for our discussion about what makes a winning small project. And now Nimi is going to talk about some of Nim Tim's inspired recent domestic projects. So I'll just hand over to Nimi. Hi, Nimi.
Hey, everybody. Right, let me just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. So thanks to Rob and AJ for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm one half of Nim Tim Architects. We're a studio of 6 architectural staff, an office manager and a dog based in South London. And we try with all of our projects, whatever the size, to put people at the centre of our design process, to create stories that everyone can relate to. So we play, talk and listen to understand the unique needs and ambitions of our clients and the future users. And through this approach emerges projects that are full of playfulness and personality. We try to use cost-effective natural materials to make healthy, simple and joyful spaces. Our work is inspired by and designed with the people that will play, rest and grow in them. We believe that we can only create truly sustainable, healthy buildings that reflect the diversity of our communities by talking and listening to the people that will live in them ultimately. So our process is very much focused on dialogue and collaboration. It's about empowering the people that are involved to contribute to each project and the making process. So this allows us to create buildings and spaces that reflect the personalities and values of the people that will use them. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 projects. Cloister Corner, which is an extension to an Edwardian ground floor flat. Cork House, which is a rear extension and a loft conversion to a small Victorian terrace. And Fruit Box, which has just recently been completed and is a side and a rear extension and a complete reconfiguration to a late 1960s townhouse. So we start at the beginning. We ask questions, we play games, and we test out various scenarios. We find that our design process always begins with a conversation, and in this case, it's with our clients. So we make a conscious decision to not allow a modest scope, size, or budget to negatively affect our architectural response. So, concepts. At Cloister Corner, we try to maximise the space within a restricted and overshadowed site. The clients originally approached us with approval for a basement addition to their ground floor flat. But after looking at costs and drainage, we suggested reviewing the potential at ground floor. So we eventually came up with a proposal that extended along the eastern boundary of the site, as that side bordered rear yards of commercial buildings and would not impact on neighbouring daylight or amenity. And it also allowed us to extend the envelope of the flat, providing light and air to all the bedrooms and the shared spaces. At Cork House, the existing level at the front of the house is 1 metre higher than the rear garden. And in order to connect the internal spaces and the family to their garden, we introduced a stepped internal landscape, which defined different uses within a larger family space through changes in floor level. We proposed a series of levels which articulated the open plan space and stepped down gradually towards the garden. A kitchen and dining space and informal seating at the rear are defined by their own datum, providing privacy while still maintaining a connection. At Fruit Box, it was set within a former orchard. So we often use the history of the sites to inform our proposals and our concepts. And we wanted to resolve the awkwardly shaped site and topography here. So our concept was quite bold, and although it went through a number of reiterations through the planning process, we felt we still were able to maintain much of our original ideas, which were to create something that could be flexible and adaptable over time. The clients for this project approached us while they were expecting their first child, and it recently completed by the time their children were 2 and 5 years old. So I think it's a bit of a myth that small projects are quick and fast. Sometimes they can be quite slow and rigorous. Materials and details. So at Cloister Corner, from discussing and listening to our clients, we understood that private spaces for them could be small and intimate, while family spaces could be much more adaptable and provide a variety of functions and levels of intimacy. So we introduced a glazed gallery that was framed by stained Accoya mullions, which would run along the edge of the new addition and connecting the children's bedrooms to the rest of the house. The roof of the children's bedrooms rises steeply from the boundary to provide high-level glazing into each space. And our client described this part of the house as like the corner of a Benedictine cloister. We carefully considered the joinery within this project because we needed to maximize the storage space, making them more usable within the kind of the restrictions of such a small, tiny footprint of the flat. We spend a lot of time researching and choosing our materials and colour palettes for each project. And we believe this is often where the richness of the collaboration really kicks in, and why the creation of the project belongs to everyone who's been involved, not just us. So at Cork House, we wanted a material to form the new space that was simple but also textural and would complement the richness of the London stock bricks at the rear. Although there wasn't much of many precedents for using cork on small projects, our clients felt invested in it for both its sustainable and aesthetic qualities. They were so emboldened that they chose pink for the windows, which we love. We always try to reduce the potential for steelwork and keep things as light and simple as possible. The side and rear extensions at Fruit Box are entirely constructed from timber, which is exposed internally and with a brick skin externally. Of course, that does mean a lot of rigorous setting out with the builder on site to make sure everything lined up. The project uses simple and thoughtful materials. The floor is a cost-effective lino, but cut into a bespoke triangulated pattern that relates to the awkward shaped garden. The kitchen is clad in a plain white ceramic tile that continues the simplicity of the materiality. And the tiles were actually the client's idea, which we felt enriched our original concept. The value of a trustworthy, hardworking builder can't be overstated. We believe that they can become a trusted friend and a colleague. We've been fortunate that the contractors we work with have shown willingness to try new things, as well as a commitment to us and our clients, which has been a big part of our most successful small projects. Historically, the relationship between an architect and builder can be confrontational. We try to invite builders and makers to contribute to the design of the building. Can they build it better than we've suggested? Can we persuade them to buy into the ambition for the project? The result is projects that are playful but serious, ambitious but relatable, and familiar and exciting. More importantly, they resonate with the people who we created them for, ensuring that they will be cared for, invested in, and have a long life. By telling strong stories through these small projects, we've been able to inspire the interest of journalists, editors, social media. And from the most modest scale of projects, we've learned the power of the smallest interventions to radically change the nature and perception of the things around them. We never see the scale or budget of a project as limiting its conceptual potential, and bring the same ambition to a piece of furniture or an urban block. Thank you very much. I'll just stop the share.
Great. Thank you very much, Nimi. That was really, really interesting insight into the practice's work. So now what we're going to do, we're going to ask, Martin's going to join us again. And we're going to talk for about 10 minutes or so about this question of what makes a winning small project. I think a lot of the questions I was going to ask have sort of been answered by your presentations. Actually, went into really real depth about the thought processes of your design process. But I just wanted to say to those who are listening or watching in, if you'd like to ask questions or send in questions, please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and there's a question and answer button there. So please send in your questions and we can get onto them. We'll be asking those shortly, so it'll be really good to get some good questions from you. So I just wanted to start by asking, I think, small projects in a way sort of stereotypically about constraints. They're about constraints of budget, often of site. And I just wanted to sort of talk about that or think about that aspect. How do you see in a way constraints are often a sort of creative driver of projects in your work? Because it often seems that if you have sort of boundaries, that's often quite a good thing of way of, in terms of design, is pushing against them, testing them. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that. Either Nimi or Martin, I don't know if you want to kick off.
Should I? Yeah, I think absolutely they can be important starting points for projects, and they give you parameters to work within. And I think it does sometimes bring out a certain kind of creativity, I suppose, in projects. Be it sort of, I mean, it might be looking at materials in a different way, for instance, which it might come from budgetary constraints. But yes, I think definitely there are that side is key sometimes.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think we tend to find projects. I think sometimes we often look at spaces and see sometimes the constraints within them. So we try and find the issues that might not, be obvious, because I think that's at the heart of good design, to just make sure that it's really well resolved to whatever the situation might be. And I think that it's also we use it sometimes as a way to tell the stories of the projects. Each project might have a different constraint, and using that narrative to build into your design can help formulate a story that then can help people connect to it. And so we find often that clients and contractors and contributors can come on board and feel part of something. So we use it in that way as well.
So in a way, that's about. So I was interested in how you're talking about creating a narrative in your work, or at least in the way you talk about your work, to engage with all the other people you work with. That obviously seems a really key aspect of how you work. Is that right? In terms of what sort of narrative, when you talk about a narrative, can you explain what that is, or how you sort of how you formulate that, I suppose? Or
I think it's quite organic process, and not always it's not always apparent at the beginning. And sometimes it comes through the process of going through the design that we build the narrative and we build this kind of story. But I think if we can find a sort of something to tell, or if we can find something to try and thread through the project, it ultimately helps us to make decisions as we go throughout the process. So we can always relate it back to what the original concept and thread is, which helps us to explain why we're doing things. So we find it quite a useful tool in communication and helping people to understand our thought process, I guess. And I think we start to develop it just by listening. So we try and we observe our clients and listen to them and interact with them, play games with them, make it really light and fun. So in many ways, they don't realize that they are telling us the story. Yeah. And then we can sort of we can kind of unravel it and find the threads that we can from our work with them. And that's why I think we put people at the heart of the process, because it is very much about that starting point. And if we can get that right, I think then we can get the later stages. It kind of all falls into place a little bit easier.
Do you recognise that, Martin, in terms of particularly, I don't know, relating to the client, or in terms of the builders, or all the other people involved? In fact, the makers, as maybe describe them all.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, it is about a collaboration. That this small projects in particular, I think the client relationship is absolutely key. But it's everybody in the process is key. And in a sense, I mean, often small projects are done without architects at all. I mean, so actually for a client to employ an architect in the first instance is a sort of an act of faith in some ways. But I think, yeah, the collaborative nature of any project like that, and it's usually very specific. So yes, absolutely. And I think it's what we enjoy about the process are those people that you meet, and also that you have an opportunity to develop relationships over time.
Yeah, because just on the client side of it, I was interested in how this is actually Marley, our sponsors, asked a question, which is in terms of sustainability. I mean, obviously that's a key thing now. I mean, do you find there's an understanding with clients? Is it sort of understanding of sustainability and also a desire for sustainability in terms of the construction? And do you find that coming from the client now? And also, how do you, I don't know, because it's quite a complicated field now, how do you sort of go about talking about sustainability or with the client or explaining aspects? Do you find that very receptive, I'd say? Is that the case nowadays, probably?
I think our clients are very keen to be sustainable and use the latest technologies. I think the problem comes with the budget, and so our kind of challenge is to try and incorporate sustainable solutions that are cost effective as well. So, for instance, trying to reduce steel work, not use as much concrete, try and make things adaptable, flexible, so that they can ultimately stay in the space for as long as possible, and it can work for them as they grow. We always find that is, because that is an aspect of sustainability as well, that this isn't something that's a throwaway thing that you're going to kind of invest in, and it's going to be something that has longevity to it. And then there's sort of, it can come down to quite small details, for instance, the insulation type you choose, or the kind of wall cladding that you use. At Corkhouse, we tried to keep everything exposed because we could, we didn't need to clad it. And cork is quite sustainably harvested, albeit in Portugal. But we feel that if you're using something, we're trying to express the honesty of it, and sort of applying finishes and more things on top of it when you don't necessarily need to is not necessarily sustainable.
Yeah. Martin, I don't know if you like, for instance, the because obviously you were saying you're using very simple methods at the or at least you're just interested in the sustainability side, and whether the client in North Wales, were they very keen for it to be a sustainable project, or did you?
Yes, I mean, I think it was done in a sort of a quite simple and I guess sort of intuitive way up to a point as well. I mean, for smaller projects, you don't always get the opportunity to analyze in huge detail through the design process in that way. I think you do get the benefit of sort of post-completion analysis and things, and that's sort of very useful. But I think you sort of build up over a sequence of projects, perhaps particular materials, techniques, approaches. I mean, timber frame that we use on a lot of our projects, but it does come down to sort of simple stuff like putting in lots of insulation, trying to lower the amount of energy you're using in the first place, and rarely does it get sort of too complex, I suppose. But yes, I mean, I think clients are very interested and keen and aware of all of these needs of projects.
Mm. And do you find in smaller projects there's more of an emphasis on materials and tactility? I don't know, just in terms of, often smaller projects are potentially domestic spaces and with more intense occupation. Do you feel there's more of a focus, I don't know, on the material, on the detailing, perhaps compared with larger projects? Or, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's quite key, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and this project is an example of that. But yes, I think materials are key, and it is the stuff you touch. But I guess, again, sort of by nature, it's you're assembling a very specific palette for a small project, and it's about the feel of that space and what those few materials bring to it.
We're getting some questions in here, so I might ask. Here's one from Joe Burke. Does a small project mean a small design fee? Nimi, I don't. Or...
We'd like to think so, but I think what we've shown is that a small project has just as much work, if not more potentially, than a large project. So actually, yeah, and it takes as much time as a larger project as well. So unfortunately, it doesn't mean a small design fee. is the short answer.
Yes. And there's another one here from Malgorzata Rutkowska. What media or tool do you use to find best to explain your design and visualize it and the ideas for your clients? How do you communicate with your clients when you're first explaining design ideas? Martin, I don't know if you want to.
I think, I mean, hand sketching and models really is still what we use. I mean, we do use computer generated imagery and things at certain times, but I think there's no substitute for a model. I think we still find with projects, but I think actually being able to draw in with a client, I mean, to explore ideas around a table, I think hand sketches is what we still use a lot. But yeah, model making, I think, is key for us and for clients, we find.
Amy, I don't know, what methods do you use?
We have quite a mix of things. It depends on what the client reacts to, or how they can, whatever helps them, I guess. So we have a range of kind of models, sketches, materials, samples. It also depends. We like to use the strengths of the job runner as well. So it's very much about who within the team is running the project and what they enjoy doing as a way to express the design. So yeah, it changes from project to project, depending.
And I just, there's a question here for you, Martin. I don't know whether it could be, just I think about the specific project, the house in North Wales. Did you consider using natural lighting by windows or using artificial lighting more? I don't know whether that was perception that it's quite a dark space, but that was possibly because it's an old cottage. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the character of the spaces, we were trying to retain that feel. And yes, I mean, the existing house does have quite small windows. It's a house that was built in the mid 19th century. I mean, there are two large openings which are designed to take in the panoramic views. But I think it's more about the character of the natural light through the day, though, perhaps, than the artificial light that was key. I mean, and perhaps the sort of the scale of the openings, it does animate the space in a more dramatic way. And I think, I mean, the weather in that part of Wales changes enormously. I mean, you do have sort of, yeah, 4 seasons in a day, literally sometimes. And so yeah, that was important. But I think, yeah, the natural light more than the artificial light, definitely.
Well, you're also trying to capture views for the particular, I mean, with the setting, you know,
yes.
In terms of positioning of openings.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, but it's a balance really of not absolutely opening up everything to what's, you know, potentially quite an overwhelming view, actually. But yeah, the view was key, and it was as much about that. Yeah.
Is that also the case? I mean, looking at, I mean, some of the projects you showed on urban projects, you know, thinking about views out, capturing light, or how you deal with openings on a more constrained site. Do you often try to sort of direct the view, or, you know, or is in a way it's just a different, it's the same but different, isn't it? It's just a more constrained situation. Or
I think a lot of our clients come to us with quite constrained sites and need more data, you know, want better light in their space, or potentially, you know, that they're north facing, and it's about making it warm and feel sunny. So a lot of it is for us about looking at the design and trying to introduce that naturally in the first instance. How can we sort of funnel the light so it's shining where we need it to shine, but also understanding that maybe, for instance, at Cloister Corner, the bedrooms are, you know, that they're potentially quite dark spaces, because they can be, you know, by understanding what the client needs, that they then can work out, well, actually, I'm happier to make those spaces quite dark spaces, top lit, and maybe actually I want to make the most of where sort of the dining spaces or the kitchen spaces, make them the brightest spaces. So it's all about just understanding what your client needs and what is happening with the daylight in that specific context.
Yeah. And there's a question here for you as well, just about the construction of the cork house, just a question about the external cladding and whether the cork was treated. I don't know if you could talk about what the makeup of the external cladding is.
The wall is it's block work in the centre with cork on the internal face, providing the insulation and the finish, and then also cork on the external face, providing the external finish and the rain screening and the weatherproofing. I should just say that there are certain issues with using cork, specifically the spread of flame, and it would be important to get a good building control officer on board if you are thinking of using it. But the clients love it. It's not treated, it's heated because of quite a high temperature to form the panels, and when you're up close, it sort of smells a bit smoky, but the clients love it, and actually it's quite a good acoustic treatment as well. It stops the noise bouncing and reverberating across the space. So although it's used in an open plan, the clients, I think, said they had about 20 people for Christmas, and it was actually bearable, you know, with kids. It wasn't too noisy. So yeah, there is a lot of information and details about cork online now, but yeah, I just research it and make sure it's used in the proper application.
Great. I'm going to pick up another question here. I think it's a question about rural build. How might you cope with a rural build without on-site services? Well, I presume you, Martin, there were services at the house in North Wales.
As in yes. Yes, I mean there was water and electricity.
Did you use renewable? I mean, out of interest, were you using PV panels or was on that project?
No, we haven't. No, it's powered by electricity. There's no gas or oil or anything like that. The heating system is an electric system. But no, there aren't any on-site renewables. But I mean, it is something, given that it's an all-electric system, that could be added in the future if it became an opportunity.
We have another question coming in, was about fees again, but just interested, do you find it more difficult to cover your fees on this type of project, or in terms of the intensity of work? I'm always interested in the relative intensity of work on a small project, for the amount of the time you spend for the size of the project. Do you find that sometimes an issue as a practice? Mimi or
I think it is a challenge. I think it's a bit of a juggling act, trying to balance the time that we would like to spend on a project with the fee that we're getting. We're still, to be honest, we're still working it out. There are some projects that go right onto site that we continue the whole way, and there are other projects that don't go right to the end of the process. And it's just about managing our time on all the different projects that we've got. It does also mean that I think when you're a practice that's doing a lot of small projects, we have to take on a lot more of them to kind of make the fees work. So it is a lot about sort of spinning plates. But I think the most successful projects are a lot of the time where the clients get on board and they sort of buy into the narrative of what we're trying to do, and they sort of facilitate some of the aspects of the build. So for instance, at Courthouse, the clients, took it on themselves to kind of research and find a lot of the sanitary ware, a lot of the kind of finishes, and they'd go to kind of seconds or sales or whatever, and samples, and sort of try and keep the cost down that way, but take on a lot of the responsibility for that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely concur with that. I mean, it is always a challenge, but I think it's true that with small jobs, I mean, that sometimes there is that opportunity for clients to get. I mean, in the house in Wales, similarly, the clients were quite involved with some of the final specification and sourcing of things. But yeah, I mean, they are definitely always a challenge. And like Nimi, I mean, we've not really figured it out, and sometimes we get it a bit wrong. But yeah, I think the more you do, the better you get at it, and where to focus attention and at different stages of the project, different intensity to different tasks.
I'm just going to ask another question, which is just about the clients. It's about if there's a conflict ever between the client's wants and what the architect thinks is best. Do you always try and reconcile the client's tastes and desires with your architectural intent? Is that, yeah, I mean, do you find there are conflicts and that sometimes you have to compromise? I mean, presumably that's the whole aspect of communication you're talking about, Nimi. Just it's about a conversation and being able to not resolve differences, but bring the client or bring others along with you.
I think for us, it's very much a part of making them feel emboldened so that they can bring their own view and their own perspective to the table. And we've had some lovely surprises where it isn't particularly what we would do, but the result is, it's very much makes the project, and we couldn't be more thankful for them. For instance, the pink windows at Courthouse was the client's idea. At Fruitbox, the kind of this sort of tiled kitchen was the client's idea. Right. And we're constantly surprised. And I think I think everyone can be surprised, and that's part of the joy of doing these sorts of projects, that you do have that surprise element where people, it's unexpected sometimes, and it's more special for it.
Do you find that, Martin, as well? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to this, the sort of collaboration that is part of all of these projects. But I think it's that sort of continuing that and maintaining that dialogue with the clients through the process. And I think sometimes there are things that you end up revisiting. You go sort of in a particular direction at a certain point, but I think it is about the communication, and that's part of the sort of joy of these sorts of projects.
Someone's asking about use of structural timber. I think this is possibly for you, Nimi, but was this the last project you showed? And not the fruit box. Yeah. The decision in a way to use structural timber, I suppose, rather than steel, and what the consequences were for the design process.
I guess, yeah, you do have to make sort of decisions if you are going to do that. It does kind of limit the spans of how far you can go, and how big your openings can be potentially. So there is design implications that the client needs to be on board with, but we try and tie it into the aesthetic of the project, so it's part of the concept and the story that we're trying to tell. So we then decided to express this kind of the timber element and expose it internally, and sort of make it kind of a warm kind of interior that might be kind of like a cabin within an orchard or something. So yeah, I think it is, other than the kind of spatial constraints, it can actually enrich the design.
Martin, with the house in North Wales, was the extension there? Is that that was timber frame, is that right? Or
That's right. Yeah, the new extension was timber frame.
what was the decision? I don't know. How did you make the decision for that as opposed to a steel frame? Or
I think, I mean, in a way, I think we always sort of default to timber in the first instance. I mean, I think it's something we like using, and somehow it's about the sort of the feel, I suppose, to a degree. I think with this project, I mean, it was a key benefit that it was very light compared to trying to bring steel onto the site. So I mean, that was definitely a factor in this case. And I suppose, I mean, the embodied energy within the final construction for a house that will be there for a long time. So, but yeah, I think we default to timber really, and it's our preferred material where we can.
So I think we'll just take one more question. There's a question here about procurement routes and contracts. It'd be interesting to know, what do you normally use for your projects? I mean, Nimi, for those 3 projects you showed, were you using a similar procurement route and contract?
Yeah, I think we use the same for all 3. I think we tend to use the REBA domestic works contract. It's sort of based on the JCT contract, but it's much simpler to understand. We act as contract administrator between the client and the contractor. But yeah, I think all 3 of those projects were done under REBA domestic works.
Yeah. Is that what you use, Martin, or?
We do, but actually the North Wales project, we used a JCT minor works contract, and it was a full sort of traditional service and a full package. But yeah, I mean, we often use the JCT contract as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was really, thanks so much to both of you for talking about, for presenting as well, for really thought-provoking presentations, and for talking about what makes for a really successful small project. And it was fantastic of you to join us. Thanks very much, Nimi. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to hand back to Emily to say a few closing words about the AJ Small Projects. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Martin, Nimi, and Rob, for such a compelling discussion. I think particularly around the issue of constrained sites and creative responses to those, there was so much food for thought there. Many thanks to our sponsor, Marley, and our thanks to everyone for listening and asking questions today. So please do visit the AJ website to find out more about how to enter AJ Small Projects, and do remember to get your entry in by Friday, the 15th of January. So the very best of luck with your entries, and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.